Oh, no, can't turn the lights on. I'd wake her up for sure. Oops, my keys. Where did they go? Can't see a darn.
Who's there? Is that you, William?
If I don't answer, maybe she'll go back to sleep.
I said, who's there? William Morris, is that you?
Ding! Busted anyhow. Mary's been moving the furniture again. Yes, it's me, Mary.
Well, I wish my mother was here to see what I have to contend with. My husband coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning and...
And I would have made it if it hadn't been for you, you broken down, dead blasted antique.
Oh, Bill, kicking the chair. That's silly. Blaming the chair is just as bad as going down to the seashore and saying to the ocean, you make me sick.
And speaking of the ocean and being sick, most of us are well acquainted with the fact that some unfortunate ocean voyagers view the sea as a large body of water entirely surrounded by trouble. Many facetious suggestions as to remedies for mal de mer have been made. Among them, the immediate searching out of a palm tree to sit under. But seasickness, to those who have experienced it, is no laughing matter. Neither is air sickness. And evidently there are ways to circumvent them both, for our science reporter tells me we're about to devote this excursion in science to a consideration of the prevention of air and sea sickness. And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Emerson Markham.
Thank you, Bob Stone, and how do you do, everyone? Before we get into our story, I'd like to acknowledge our indebtedness to Dr. G.R. Wendt, chairman of the Department of Psychology at the University of Rochester, and secretary of the Subcommittee on Motion Sickness of the National Research Council. It was from Dr. Wendt that I obtained the facts we'll be discussing.
Well, Emerson, before we start to consider the whys and wherefores, let's turn to the brighter side. Is there any hope that motion sickness can be prevented?
Yes, Bob, there is. Dr. Wendt says that research workers have made very satisfactory progress toward that goal. They've already learned how to prevent motion sickness in a large proportion of cases and are actively working to improve their methods.
Well, that's encouraging. Just what is the cause of motion sickness, Emerson?
We carry the chief cause of motion sickness around in our own ears, Bob. Many deaf people can't be made seasick. You see, besides the hearing apparatus, the inner ear contains a mechanism that makes it possible to perceive motion of the body from side to side, up and down, backward and forward, to sense any tipping or turning of the body and restore its balance. When a person is subjected to large, unusual movements for a period of time, such as the tossing due to rough air in flight or to sea waves, he is likely to get sick. This is because these organs in the ear then send their nerve messages not only to the parts of the brain that keep one's balance, but also to the part that produces nausea and vomiting.
Then are the susceptible person's ears more active than those of the person not susceptible, Emerson?
No, Bob, they are neither better nor worse than those of the non-susceptible, according to research studies. The trouble seems to lie in the mechanisms of nausea, which are more sensitive in some people than in others. People range all the way from those who are never sick, no matter how high the sea is, to those who stay sick during an entire cruise, perhaps even with a smooth sea.
And is motion the only cause of sickness?
It's the primary cause, but there are a number of other contributing causes. It is believed by researchers that what the eyes are doing is important, and investigations are being carried on to find the causes of trouble. And then an overheated cabin increases air sickness in planes. Odors, particularly those associated with others being sick, may increase the tendency to get sick from motion. And fatigue and illness, especially gastric upsets, contribute to motion sickness. Posture is important. Lying down helps. And then there are a number of factors usually called psychological.
Well, yes, I've heard the claim that motion sickness is all psychological. Dr. Wendt is a psychologist and a research worker. Did he say whether there's truth in that statement?
As you phrased it, I can say without hesitation that it is not true, that it is all psychological, Bob. Dr. Wendt says that several psychological factors are important, but basically sickness depends on the kind of wave and on the sensitivity of the vomiting mechanisms of the particular person. The importance of psychological factors is made clear by the fact that the inexperienced are more likely to get sick than are the experienced.
Why is that? Because they expect to get sick?
Yes, partly. It has been shown that persons who expect to get sick, because the research worker has shown them a movie of another undergoing motion sickness, are more prone to sickness. And giving a sugar pill, well, that helps some if the person believes it is a powerful preventive pill.
Well, those are good things to know. And now, how about telling us what's been done toward prevention of motion sickness?
Well, let's take seasickness first. During the war, a great deal of research was done in England, Canada, and in this country to find drugs which will prevent seasickness. Dr. Wendt says that they are far from perfect, but they did prevent about 2/3 of the cases. After taking the pills, only 1/3 as many got seasick as compared with those among the controls who took a sugar pill that looked just like the real pill. The research on these drugs often began in the laboratory. Human subjects, or sometimes dogs, for they suffer from seasickness too, were tested on big swings and wave machines to find useful drugs. But the final tests were always made at sea with servicemen as subjects.
Can you tell us the names of any of these drugs?
A well-known drug, scopolamine, gives excellent results when used in small doses. This drug is used ordinarily as a sedative for surgery and during childbirth. It's commonly known as twilight sleep.
But wouldn't it be undesirable to give such a drug as scopolamine to men in combat, Emerson?
Well, fortunately, no. In the small doses used, it had no bad effects. Tests show that the efficiency of men taking the pills was entirely normal. The only effect is a little dryness of the mouth.
And how about air sickness? Are there different problems there?
A great deal of air sickness can be prevented without needing to use drugs. This can be done by proper training and indoctrination. The flyer should be kept from getting sick during his early training. It is then that he can learn to be sick or learn to be resistant to it.
Yes, but isn't that quite a job, keeping them from getting sick? How do they do it?
The learning is of a simple, direct kind, according to Dr. Wendt, Bob. It's known to psychologists as conditioning. You may not even be aware of learning. When you're violently nauseated, everything around you at the time and the things that you are doing become so linked with the nausea that they, too, get the power to make you ill. If you're sick while you're drinking a glass of orange juice, for example, the taste or odor of oranges may nauseate you thereafter. If you have been sick repeatedly in an airplane, or just the noise of the propellers, the various plane odors, the view of the landscape below, or any other seemingly irrelevant detail may serve to make you queasy. People so conditioned may get sick even in smooth air. On the civil air lanes, some complain that gum offered by the stewardess makes them sick. That's because at some time previous they chewed gum and soon after became airsick. By conditioning, the gum became able to make them sick. Training men so as to avoid such adverse learning as possible for the airplane, not so easy at sea.
How do you mean?
Well, you can do it in the air because a flight can be avoided or terminated when the air is rough. Every trip on which air sickness is experienced tends to keep up susceptibility. But every trip made without sickness increases tolerance for motion. If a man is kept from sickness during training, he stands a much better chance of being resistant later.
Emerson, did Dr. Wendt say whether he believes that eventually all motion sickness can be prevented, even in those whom drugs don't protect now?
He believes that greater improvements will be made, but that it doesn't seem likely now that a perfect preventive can be found. However, research workers are still trying.
Did Dr. Wendt tell you about his own research in motion sickness?
Yes, they've been doing seasickness research for the Office of Scientific Research and Development. They tried to find what kinds of waves are chiefly responsible for sickness. They had observed large differences in motion sickness depending on the rate at which the waves came. So they built a large wave machine which produced waves of various heights and rates and forms. It became clear, he said, from research on a large number of volunteer subjects, that it isn't the violence of the wave that produces sickness. A choppy, violent wave, such as would be produced in a motor torpedo boat traveling into the waves, is nauseating hardly at all. Certain kinds of slower, gentler waves, though, may be very bad. They hope by such research both to discover what kinds of waves to avoid at sea, and also something about the physiological mechanisms of seasickness.
Well, thank you, Emerson. And ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to have a copy of a paper on motion sickness by Dr. G.R. Wendt, Chairman of the Department of Psychology at the University of Rochester, to add to your scientific library, you may have one free of charge. All you have to do is address your request to Excursions in Science in care of the station to which you are now listening, asking for scientific paper number 219, entitled Prevention of Air and Sea Sickness. That's scientific paper number 219, Prevention of Air and Sea Sickness. We'll see that a copy is put in the mail for you. The time has come once again for questions and answers. If you meet with us regularly, you're aware that the questions which we consider are inquiries which you listeners have sent in. The answers are as accurate and scientifically sound as it is possible for answers to be, since they are based on information provided by staff members of the General Electric Research Laboratory or of other equally trustworthy institutions. Let's not take any more time before we get down to answering said questions. And here's the first one, Emerson. It comes from a lady who writes, "Will you please tell me if lightning is more apt to hit elm trees than other trees? I have 5 elm trees around my house, and I have been advised to cut the trees down on account of lightning striking them."
Probably the main reason that this idea has developed is that elm trees very often grow as isolated trees in open fields and promontories, and for this reason are more likely to be struck because of their isolated position.
Should our friend cut down the elms, Emerson?
Well, in this case, if the house is in an isolated position, that is, with no other trees or houses nearby, cutting down the trees will expose the house itself to lightning, for the trees, being taller than the house, will serve to protect it if they are allowed to remain.
Now, this next man would like to know how the sunrise and sunset times which appear in the newspaper are calculated.
Well, now, the method is a little too complicated to explain in a sentence. The calculations are made in the Nautical Almanac Office, which is part of the Naval Observatory in Washington. These data are published in advance.
This next gentleman writes, in a hot water heating system for private homes, is it more efficient to drain all the water from the heating system each fall and refill with fresh water, or is it better to leave in the old water? I have heard, he says, that fresh water contains more oxygen and therefore is more efficient in transferring heat.
The water should be drained in order to remove the sludge that is always present. This is a more important factor in the efficiency of the heater than the amount of oxygen.
Next, we hear from a lady in Bennington, Vermont, who asks how she can repair a glass candlestick which has been broken.
The answer to that question depends largely on the kind of break in the glass, Bob. A clean break into two pieces can be fitted together using glyptal cement between the two faces. Then put them in a vise or a holder to hold them together for about 48 hours or longer. Now, there are other cements which can be used, a good grade of glue, for example. Or airplane glue, the kind used in making model airplanes, might also do. Glyptal is just one example.
A young lady in the 9th grade science class asks us to explain why a goldfish turns silver.
Very young goldfish are often silver, almost transparent, before they are gold. Usually goldfish bought at a store are a year or so old and therefore, having passed through this stage, don't often turn color. However, if they do, they will soon assume their characteristic gold color.
This next listener writes, if you consider 10,000 feet altitude as having 100% humidity, what will the humidity be at ground level? Would it be less than 100%?
Unless there's a temperature inversion, the ground level would have a relative humidity of 100%, assuming that there's no movement of the air. If, however, the air parcel were sinking from a 10,000-foot altitude, having a 100% humidity, the temperature and dew point must be considered. For every 1,000 feet, the temperature rises 5.5%, and the dew point likewise rises 1/2 to 1 degree Fahrenheit. This means then that under these conditions, the air would be much drier at ground level, and the relative humidity at ground would be roughly between 35 and 45.
A friend in Florida asks what time of the day ultraviolet rays of the sun are most available to man.
At noon, ultraviolet rays from the sun reach a maximum intensity, which is increased if the sky is slightly cloudy. Naturally, dense cloud formations will decrease the amount of light, and hence ultraviolet radiation. But a certain degree of haziness wouldn't decrease the radiation.
If we want the powers that be around here to continue radiating goodwill, we'd better follow the practice of leaving when our time is up, which it now is. So I'll just say thank you, Emerson Markham, and goodbye, everyone, until our next excursion in science.